Elijah Sharp's ex-girlfriend has cancer. I transferred some money to her anonymously, but it was still discovered. Elijah threw the card in my face and said, "We are already married, what are you dissatisfied with? You want to use money to humiliate a dying person." I looked at him quietly. "You were the one who proposed to me, Elijah." 1. The day we found out Elijah's ex-girlfriend had cancer was the day we had planned our anniversary trip. I was packing my luggage and turned to ask Elijah for his opinion. "Should I take that dark green tie?" He stood there, staring at the screen of his mobile phone, as if he had lost all 5 senses. "Elijah!" I called out again, and he raised his head as if waking up from a dream and looked at me. "Isabel Lambert." I was stunned for a moment. "What's wrong?" "Isabel is dying." After saying this, he turned around and walked out the door without even looking at me. He walked so fast that it seemed that if he was a second slower, he would never see that person again. When I arrived at the hospital, Elijah had already found Isabel in the ward. He read through her diagnosis report with a sullen face, and then asked her, "When did it happen?" Isabel curled up in a small ball on the hospital bed, her face pale and almost transparent. "I found out during the physical examination last month. The doctor said it was too late and there was no way to cure it." Before she finished speaking, she saw me standing at the door and suddenly burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Lily Daniels, I didn't mean to disrupt your marriage, I was just too scared. I'm only 24 years old, I don't want to die." Elijah turned around and followed her gaze to me. His expression suddenly became ugly, and his eyes were full of reproach. "What are you doing here?" It seemed inconsiderate to bring up the anniversary trip we had planned because we didn't have a honeymoon. So I lowered my eyes and said to Isabel soothingly, "I'll come and see if there's anything I can help you with." Unnecessary. Before Isabel could say anything, Elijah spoke first. His tone was very stiff. "You go back." Before leaving, for some unknown reason, I looked back. Elijah had already pulled Isabel into his arms, holding her tight. Isabel's little face rested on his shoulder, her eyes closed, tears seemingly endless. "You are all I have." She choked up and murmured, "Elijah, I have nothing but you." Elijah hugged her tighter, his voice hoarse. "I know. It seems that they have always been in love and have never been apart." I stared at this scene in a daze, with endless emotions surging in my heart like a tide, but I could do nothing. In the face of death, it is ignorant for a healthy, living person to have any emotions. 2. Elijah and I are childhood sweethearts and have been dating since we were 16. Later, some changes happened in my family and they had to send me abroad. Because of the uncertainty of the time, I broke up with Elijah. He was very angry and said that I didn't trust him, and that was why I didn't want to have an overseas relationship. But on the day I left, he came to the airport to see me off with red eyes and said, "Lily, I will wait for you to come back. No matter how long it takes, I will always wait for you." Just because of this sentence, I managed to hold on through the most difficult days by myself, and completed the course that would have taken 5 years in 3 years. But when I returned to China, Elijah already had a new girlfriend, a thin but pretty girl named Isabel, who was his junior in the same school. I heard that she pursued Elijah for a long time and devoted herself to him unconditionally for 2 years before Elijah reluctantly agreed to be with her. After returning to China, we, the friends who had grown up together, got together and someone mentioned Isabel. "She's just paying for it. She follows Elijah wherever he goes. When he drinks, she accompanies him to sober him up. When he's sick, she makes porridge for him. She heard we were having a party today, and she wanted to come along." Elijah frowned, clearly in a bad mood. "Don't mention her." Right, I forgot. Now that Lily is back, it's time for Elijah to draw a line between himself and her. I subconsciously glanced at Elijah, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his phone screen with a sullen look on his face. The party that day did not end happily. After the meeting, Elijah asked if he wanted to take me home, but from the anxiety hidden in his expression, I could guess that he didn't really want to take me home. So I said quietly, "No, I didn't drink and I drove the car myself." He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and drove away. It was much later that I found out that it was Isabel's birthday. She was sitting at the highest point of the Ferris wheel, holding a cake and sending me a photo with a forced smile. Elijah drove fast all the way and finally reached her before midnight. 3. After returning home, my half-packed luggage was still spread out in the bedroom. I picked out the clothes in the box one by one and put them away. When I got the toiletries bag, I paused. There was an electric shaver in there, a bit old and a bright sky blue color, not something Elijah would buy. So who sent it? The answer is self-evident. I stared at it for a moment, then put it in my drawer. After dark, Elijah finally came back. His eyes were bloodshot, the corners of his eyes were slightly red, and his expression was a little dazed and depressed. I walked over to him and looked at him. I have already refunded my flight ticket and hotel. As for my parents, when I go back this weekend, tell them that I may not be able to bring the things I promised to bring this time, and I will buy more next time I go abroad. I was just calmly explaining the aftermath of this trip that was aborted halfway. But Elijah suddenly got angry. He stared into my eyes and said in a bad tone, "Why do you have to tell me about such a small matter? Can't you handle it yourself?" I was stunned for a second. Somehow, I suddenly remembered when we first started dating many years ago. At that time, we were in the same high school but not in the same class. I was being bullied by the girls in my class, so I tried to contact their parents. But after school, I was blocked in the equipment room by a few people who held an even stronger grudge against me. Because of the character I developed since childhood, I am used to handling things on my own, and I did all this without telling Elijah. But he still rushed there and drove those girls away from me, then turned around and looked at me angrily. "Why didn't you tell me when you were in trouble? I can handle it on my own." "But I'm your boyfriend." Elijah, who was still a teenager at that time, said this angrily, and for half a month, he even came to our class for evening self-study. It took him a long time to change my mindset bit by bit so that I would subconsciously share everything with him and tell him what I was going to do. And now he told me, "Why do you have to tell me about such a small matter? Can't you just handle it yourself?" As if realizing that his emotions were getting out of control, Elijah paused for a moment and softened his tone. "I'm sorry, Lily, I'm a little upset." I took a deep breath and said, "I'm going to take a shower." When I came out of the bathroom, Elijah was no longer in the room. I looked around and found him smoking one cigarette after another on the terrace on the second floor. Elijah is not a smoker. He had a big fight with Isabel and broke up, and soon after that he proposed to me. Isabel was also present at the proposal that day. She stood there with a pale face, crying miserably. Elijah saw it but said nothing. But that night when I woke up, I found him smoking on the balcony, staring straight at the night sky in the north and a few sparse stars. In that direction is the tallest Ferris wheel in the entire city. Just like last time, I said nothing and went back to the bedroom silently. I don't know if I caught a cold, but I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache. I already had a migraine problem, and when I was rummaging through the drawers looking for painkillers, Elijah suddenly rushed out of the bathroom, strode up to me, and looked extremely gloomy. There was obvious anger in his voice. "Where's my razor?" My temple was throbbing and aching. Before I could open my mouth, Elijah suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Lily, where's my razor?" he asked again, grabbing my hand so hard that I gasped in pain. "In the drawer of the bedside table." Elijah said nothing and turned to look for the razor Isabel had given him. I shook my red wrists, lowered my head, took out the painkillers and swallowed too. The sudden cancer that struck Isabel had taken away all of Elijah's attention, so he had no time to care about my headache. It was just a minor blemish. At least for him. In the next few days, Elijah did not go to work. He contacted almost all the top oncologists in the city. They all came to the same conclusion. Isabel's cancer has reached the late stage. No matter how she is treated, it can only prolong her life a little. Every time this result was confirmed, the pain on Elijah's face deepened. That evening I was driving home from work and ran into Elijah and Isabel in the yard. Isabel was a little thinner than the last time they met. She had changed out of her blue and white striped hospital gown and was wearing a burgundy suspender skirt. She was sitting on the swing in the yard. The golden red light of the setting sun spread down, adding a little warmth to the pale face. My husband, Elijah, was kneeling in front of her, applying lipstick to her pale lips. I sat in the car and watched this scene quietly. At that moment I couldn't help but think, perhaps the thing Elijah regrets most in his life is marrying me. I sat in a nearby bar until midnight, And Elijah seemed to finally remember that I existed in the world, so he called me. Lily, where are you? Before I could answer, the sound of a band playing came into the phone. Elijah paused. I'll pick you up. When he came over, the band had finished singing their last song and left the stage. I sat in the corner with an unfinished mojito on the table. Elijah stood in front of me. The dim light shone on his face, and he looked inexplicably cold and solemn. Why are you drinking here alone? No, I said. Just order a drink, sit down and listen to some music. After hearing what I said, Elijah's expression improved a little. He grabbed my hand and said, Let's go home. When I got into the car, I smelled a familiar smell of disinfectant. It was obvious that he finally remembered me after he sent Isabel back to the hospital. So I asked, How is Isabel doing lately? In fact, after learning about her illness, I have been maintaining a tacit silence in front of Elijah these days. This is the first time I have mentioned it. He had no choice but to answer, Not very well. I have arranged for the best doctors to treat her, but the situation is still not optimistic. As if realizing the inappropriateness of this statement, he added, Lily, don't get me wrong. I just feel that I wasn't very nice to her before, and I want to make it up to her. That's true. I heard from my friends in China that Elijah has always been mean to Isabel. Elijah met Isabel half a year after I went abroad. Isabel was extremely grateful to Elijah for helping her solve the problem, and this gratitude soon evolved into the girl's burgeoning love. Over the next 2 years, no matter how coldly Elijah responded or how he mocked her, she always maintained her utmost enthusiasm. Finally, he was moved. But even when they were in love, Isabel gave more. Thinking of this, I let out a long breath. Besides, she's dying. When he said this, Elijah's voice was even a little choked up. I have actually experienced the feeling of powerlessness and guilt that a living, healthy person feels when facing an invincible disease. That's why I feel so powerless at this moment. Even though Elijah is my husband, even though I am his legal partner, the rest of the car journey was silent. As I walked home through the courtyard, I subconsciously paused for a second in front of the swing. Elijah turned around and asked me, What's wrong? I shook my head. Nothing. So dazzling. 6. When I suggested going with Elijah to the hospital to visit Isabel, his first reaction was to stare at me warily. I pretended not to notice. No. After several seconds, Elijah responded, Okay. Perhaps because the recent treatment was quite effective, Isabel looked much better. After we met and chatted for a few minutes, she suddenly suggested that she wanted to be discharged from the hospital to work. I know I can't really recover, but in the last few months of my life, I still want to live like a normal person as much as possible. Is that okay? She looked at Elijah hopefully. How could he refuse? Elijah proposed to arrange for Isabel to work in his company, but Isabel immediately shook her head and refused. No, that would be like using a backdoor. I want to find a job based on my own abilities. Not surprisingly, Elijah found me. I'll pay her salary. You don't have to assign any work to her. It won't affect you. I couldn't help but curl my lips and ask sarcastically, Elijah, what do you think of me? He was slightly stunned. Then he sighed. But she is sick. Yes, she was sick, she had cancer and she was dying. So no matter what she wants to do, we healthy people have to accommodate her unconditionally. After a long while, I took out a business card from my bag, handed it to him and said calmly, I'll give you the HR contact information. Ask her to submit her resume and go through the normal interview process. Elijah didn't take the business card after all. He just looked at me with a very cold gaze, as if he had just met me for the first time. Lily, you scare me by haggling over a dying man. Until Elijah walked away for a long time, I still stood there without moving, maintaining the last bit of dignity. Until a little girl came up behind me, patted my shoulder and whispered in my ear, Sister, your pants are dirty. I came to my senses and thanked her. In fact, I have been feeling back pain since I got up in the morning. Just now when I was in the hospital corridor, my period came early. Elijah was so preoccupied with Isabel that he didn't even notice me going to the small store to buy a pack of sanitary napkins and to the bathroom. Many years ago, when I had my first period, I happened to be at school and was in a terrible state. It was Elijah who went to the school store to buy me sanitary napkins, and took off his school uniform jacket to tie it around my waist. But that was just 14-year-old Elijah after all. 7. I asked my assistant to do some research on Isabel. It was not much different from what I imagined. She had a tragic life, no parents who loved her, and she had always lived in poverty. Elijah was the only ray of light shining on her. Without Elijah's help, she might not have been able to pay for her cancer medical expenses. So I asked my assistant to transfer some money to Isabel's card in the name of her family. Not letting her join my company is my bottom line in upholding this engagement. Giving her this money is a bit of sympathy as a human being. But I didn't expect that Elijah would find out about it. That night, when I returned home and turned on the light, I saw him standing outside the entrance a few steps away, looking at me expressionlessly. I was a little surprised. "You're back so early today?" What answered me was a bank card that was thrown at me and hit the corner of my eye. A slight sting spread from my temple, and then the pain gradually intensified, and even my fingertips curled up. Elijah strode up to me, grabbed my wrist tightly, and said angrily, "We are already married, what else are you dissatisfied with? Why do you want to use money to humiliate her, a patient?" I didn't. "Lily, you grew up in a wealthy and happy family. You went to the best schools abroad and joined your family's company after returning home. I broke up with her and proposed to you. We have been together all the way to today. You have everything, but she has nothing. Can humiliating her help you to reach a higher level of noble status?" I closed my eyes. Countless past scenes flashed through my mind like slides, like a fragmented movie. "Elijah." I tried to keep my voice calm, but it still trembled a little. "You can't talk to me like that. You can't." Elijah let go of my hand, took a step back, and looked at me, as if he wanted to say something. But at this time his cell phone rang. When I took it out, Isabel's name flashed on the screen. Elijah's expression changed slightly, and he walked past me without hesitation and opened the door to go out. I stared at the painting on the wall and raised my hand to gently press the wound at the corner of my eye. The pain gets worse. 8. After that night, Elijah didn't go home for several days. He never contacted me, but I still knew that Isabel's condition had worsened and she was in unbearable pain, so she called Elijah crying. Elijah, who had always stood in my way at any given moment, chose to go find her without hesitation. I went to a hospital far away and had a full physical examination. The doctor told me seriously, "Ms. Daniels, you must vent your emotions appropriately. It will be good for you." I was silent for a long time. "Thanks, but I don't have anyone to vent to. Who else can I tell?" During those 3 years abroad, the worst time was when I had gastric bleeding and fell into a coma, and was sent to the hospital by classmates I had never met before. When he was discharged from the hospital, he was passing by a sparsely populated street and unfortunately encountered a street gunfight. The bullet hit his waist at an angle. I was used to being alone, and at that time Elijah and I were breaking up. When he returned to China later, Isabel was already by his side. I can't even say it. There was indeed some selfish motive in agreeing to Elijah's proposal. Because in countless nights when I was about to give up, I thought of the boy who said with red eyes at the airport that he would always wait for me, and a little courage would always arise in my dried-up heart. While thinking about the past, I slowly walked out of the hospital gate. Suddenly, a person stood in front of me. Looking up, it was Elijah. He was staring at me, his face was frighteningly cold, and his voice was filled with panic. "Lily, what are you doing in the hospital?" I was stunned for 2 seconds and suddenly reacted. He was afraid that I would be like Isabel. So I laughed and said, "A physical examination." Elijah didn't believe me, so I took out the medical examination report from my bag and handed it to him. I only kept the one given by the psychologist. Judging from the data, there is nothing serious wrong with my health. Elijah looked gloomy, carefully read the report twice, and then stared at the line "Old waist injury, no serious problem," and asked me, "What kind of injury is this? Why have I never heard you talk about it?" I was stunned. "Oh, when I was abroad, I encountered a gunfight and suffered some minor injuries." When getting into the car, Elijah's eyes were so cold that they seemed to be able to freeze. I felt helpless, staring at the receding scenery outside the window for a while, and decided to say a few more words. "Don't worry, I know my body well and I have a physical checkup every year." "I won't." "Why didn't you call me?" He suddenly interrupted me, then slammed on the brakes, stopped the car on the side of the road, pulled the seatbelt and approached me. I know he was asking about today's physical examination. So she looked at him calmly. It's just a routine checkup. Isn't Isabel's condition unstable these days? When he mentioned Isabel, a hint of mixed emotions flashed in his eyes. Seems like jealousy and also like anger. But in the end, the topic still fell on me, but the voice was no longer so confident. You should have told me when you were so badly injured, Lily. This time I actually laughed out loud. When I was hurt. I paused for a moment. It should be the day when you were finally moved by Isabel's persistent pursuit and agreed to be with her. Elijah, after the bullet was removed, I saw your Weibo post while lying in the hospital bed. 9. In the next few days, Elijah's attitude towards me suddenly became very enthusiastic. Apart from the tiring married life, even when I leave the company every day, Elijah's car is waiting for me downstairs. Suddenly it was like I was 18 years old again. At that time there was nothing between us except devout and passionate love. I pondered and guessed in my mind and finally told him, actually, you don't need to feel guilty. At that time we were halfway across the world, so it would be useless even if you knew. The smile on Elijah's lips suddenly disappeared. He took a deep breath and said, I'm not trying to make it up to you. Lily, you're my wife and we've only been married for over a year. This state of affairs is normal. Before I could say anything, Elijah's phone, which was on the car platform, suddenly lit up. It was a message from Isabel. Elijah unusually ignored it. I asked him, how is Isabel? Elijah sneered. What does it have to do with me? There are many people who want to take care of her, and I am not the only one who can help her. I think if he looked at the front mirror at this moment, he would see that his eyes reflected there were full of burning jealousy. I soon found out why. At the end of the month, I went to visit an elder who was hospitalized, and he happened to be in the same hospital as Isabel. When I passed by Isabel's ward, I saw her sitting on the bed in her hospital gown, dialing the number over and over again with her bony hands. Beside the bed stood a young man in black clothes and a baseball cap. He glanced at me at the door with a gloomy look, and said to Isabel very gently, stop hitting him. After all, he is married and he has to go back to be with his wife. You still have me. Isabel pretended not to hear anything and continued to call Elijah, crying and choking as she said, don't ignore me, Elijah. You said you would stay with me until the end. I admit that at that moment I envied her. Because my life is moving forward along a predetermined trajectory, and I never have any choice. When I got home, Elijah had already prepared dinner. I casually mentioned, I saw Isabel today, she seems to have lost weight again. Elijah stared at me, his eyes suddenly becoming serious. Why did you go to see her? That look was like a sharp knife, instantly waking me up from my self-paralyzed dream. I laughed sarcastically. Don't be nervous, I'm not trying to cause trouble for her. I just happened to pass by when I was watching someone else. I did not mean that. Elijah said, avoiding my eyes. Perhaps to make up for it, he suggested going out on a date on his birthday next month. Let's go to the midnight movie, 2 shows in a row, and then go to the beach to watch the sunrise together. I should have refused, but he looked at me so intently, and the plan he proposed happened to be the one we did together on my 16th birthday. At that time I was almost suffocating. Even though Elijah didn't know what was going on, he was able to sense that I was in a bad mood, so in the middle of the night, he knocked on the window and took me away. We watched 2 movies together, a little thing called First Love, and Roman Holiday. When the movie ended, the sky was slightly white. Elijah took me on a bike ride along the coastal highway. Finally, the car stopped at the edge of the cliff. The golden light of the rising sun emerged from the sea little by little, and he confessed his love to me. But that was a long, long time ago. It took so long that he had to take me to do it all over again before I could pick up the details scattered in my memory. So I said yes. I said yes. Like a night when I was 16. 10. Even if I watch the same movie, I still can't get back to the original mood. Just like when I was with Elijah, I kept reminiscing about the past. That means that the present him can no longer balance my love and disappointment. I just can't accept it, and always miss the times in the past when he held me and prevented me from falling. After realizing this, I focused my attention on Elijah, who was beside me. He wasn't watching the movie either but was rather anxious. Occasionally I would take out my phone to take a look, then put it back as if I were hurt. I quietly reminded him, "It's vibrating. Someone's calling you." Elijah forced a smile and said, "Don't worry about her. I'm here to celebrate your birthday with you today." The sad and ridiculous thing is that I really believe this sentence. After the movie ended, Elijah answered Isabel's 28th call, and she cried desperately, "Elijah, being sick is really hard. I vomited a lot of blood. Am I going to die? Elijah." Under my gaze, Elijah calmly put away his phone, then leaned over and kissed my cheek. "I'm going to the bathroom," and then never came back. I waited for a long time at the door of that remote but seaside private cinema, and finally called Elijah. He turned off his phone. After hanging up the phone, I found that Isabel had applied to be my WeChat friend. I passed. She sent several messages quickly. "I'm sorry, Sister Lily. I know today is your birthday. I just really want to prove how important I am to him. You are Elijah's favorite. No matter how good I am to him, I can't shake your position in his heart. But I am sick and dying now. Please let me be willful for once and be a vicious woman." White moonlight. White moonlight. This word is really disgusting. There was a violent emotion running rampant in my heart, and before I could respond, a hand suddenly reached out from the side and pulled me into the alley with great force. I fell to the ground in my skirt, my knees and elbows scraping against the rough ground and walls, causing waves of excruciating pain. Then he looked up and met a pair of gloomy and crazy eyes, a little familiar but also very strange. It was the young man in black who stood by Isabel's bedside that day. "You are Elijah's wife? How dare you make you unhappy? She is suffering from cancer every day and night, and what about you? It's not enough for you to be your eldest daughter happily. You also want to snatch the person she likes, making her last days of life unhappy." He held down the brim of his baseball cap and looked at me cruelly. "Do whatever hurts, but don't let her pass out." The sky gradually turned white. Sunrise is coming. Behind the boy, a tall and ferocious man walked out and stopped in front of me. Dust flew everywhere. Why does everyone feel sorry for Isabel? It's obviously me who has nothing. 11. Those fragmented images flashed through my mind again. This time I could see it a little more clearly. When I was 6 years old, my mother was suddenly diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. Even with complete resection, the cancer cells still spread. As she was lying in bed, with her vitality growing weaker day by day, someone came to her house. She's my aunt, her twin sister, and she looks 80% like my mother. She naturally took her sister's place and took over everything that originally belonged to her. My father was not dissatisfied at all because he knew very well that the two families must be tied together. I was only 6 years old at that time and I seemed to understand everything. I didn't understand why I had to call my aunt Mom, and why after only 1 month of her coming to my house, I already had a half-sister. I only remember that on the day my mother passed away, she held my hand very tightly and said, "Shao Ci, you must live well and live healthily." This sentence later became my shackles. So much so that every time I heard Isabel say that she didn't want to die, I felt a sense of absurdity in my heart. The person who wanted to live well and be loved well was suffering from a terminal illness. Those who want to die must live with guilt. When I was at home, I couldn't do much because I was the eldest daughter and had to shoulder the responsibilities of the Daniels family. But my sister can act like a spoiled child and is free to do whatever she wants. After my relationship with Elijah became known, my dad asked my aunt to come and talk to me. She was wearing my mother's cheongsam and pearl necklace, and she looked at me with contempt and pity. "You want to fall in love, fine, but don't give away your virginity, or it will be worthless. Lily, you are the older sister. You wouldn't want your younger sister to take on the responsibility for you, right? When I was 20, she gave me two choices. Or I can immediately marry the business partner who is 20 years older than me, and whom my father has been unable to get over recently. Either go abroad to study business, come back after graduation, get married, and help run the company." I chose the second one. Soon after returning home, they began to evaluate who would be a suitable marriage partner, and what kind of family they should be tied to in order to maximize the interests of the Daniels family. They think rationally, soberly, and comprehensively. But I was not asked for my opinion. Fortunately, Elijah proposed to me at that time. I agreed to him, and I thought he would be able to hold me on the edge of the abyss and try not to let me fall, just like he did for many years before. But Isabel is already by his side. 12. When the hem of the skirt was torn to pieces, I finally touched the high-heeled shoes that had been taken off and thrown aside, then lift it high and smash it down with force. Warm blood splashed on his face and the man fell limply. Holding up my blood-stained high heels, I slowly stood up against the wall. A few steps away, the boy heard the noise and turned to look at me. There was a cloud in his eyes. "You have some skills." I took 2 breaths and said to him, "Isabel, your sweetheart, has always been sorry for me. No matter how much you like her, she only has Elijah in her heart. Even if Elijah is married, even if she is dying, she will not consider you." "Shut up." He rushed over angrily and slapped me in the face. "If you don't accept Elijah's proposal, they will make up soon after the quarrel, and she will live happily with Elijah." My cheeks were aching and burning. I looked up at him and smiled calmly. "Why can't I agree? If Isabel and Elijah quarreled and said she wanted to marry you, would you reject her? She's dying. Even if you have all the skills, you can't cure her cancer. So you take your anger out on an innocent person like me." I paused and uttered 2 words softly. "Waste. If you are so reluctant to let her go, you should die with her." At that moment, I remembered what the serious-looking doctor had said. "Miss Daniels, you must vent your emotions appropriately. It will be good for you." It is true. The boy stared at me blankly for a while, then suddenly let out a sharp wail, slowly slid down the wall and curled up on the ground. He cried so sadly. I just watched quietly, somewhat puzzled. People like them always think that they are the most pitiful people in the world. Isabel, Elijah, and him all the same. I managed to straighten my tattered skirt and walked out of the alley just as the sunrise in the distant sky was emitting the first golden rays of light. Then little by little, until the light filled the entire dark sky. Very beautiful scenery. So it doesn't really matter whether Elijah is there to watch it with me or not. I took a taxi to the police station to report the incident, handed over my blood-stained high heels, and asked the police if this was considered self-defense. The young female police officer looked at me, her clear eyes full of pity. "Miss Daniels, don't worry. The marks on your body prove that it was an attempted rape. But, are you okay?" I said it was okay. It might hurt a little, but I could take care of the wound myself. "Do you need to contact your family to pick you up? Who can I contact?" I lowered my eyes and smiled. "No, my family members all have their own things to do." After completing the statement, I went home, found the divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago, signed it, and mailed it to Elijah's company. During all this process, Elijah never contacted me once. But I could see from Isabel's circle of friends that he accompanied her to Yunnan. The reason, of course, is the same one that has been used countless times. She is dying. This was her last wish. At Songshan Mountain and Arai Lake, she sat on the swing and was pushed high by him, with her intact skirt fluttering in the wind. She said, "Elijah, when I die, you bury my ashes here. I want to be a free soul. If you think of me occasionally, come here and enjoy the scenery." How romantic. She even wanted to die so romantically and profoundly, so that Elijah would miss her all his life. After reading this circle of friends, I indifferently deleted Isabel's friend. In fact, I can guess what Elijah is thinking. He doesn't contact me in an almost self-deceptive way. It was as if only he didn't tell me, and silently accompanied Isabel through the last journey of her life, and then came back to me, and we could continue on as if nothing had happened. But it's impossible. Before leaving the city, I went to meet someone. It was a mutual friend of Elijah and I named Logan Fisher. Because of my personality, I haven't made many friends since I was a child, and he can barely be considered one of them. "I'm leaving now." He bit the cigarette and stood up in shock. "No way, you have cancer too?" I laughed. "How is that possible? Just don't stay here, go to another city." "What about the Daniels family's company and business?" "No," I said calmly and repeated. "From the beginning, I didn't want it." In fact, everyone knew that Elijah was entangled with his ex-girlfriend who was terminally ill. Everyone was laughing at me, so when I told my family the news of the divorce, my aunt said gently, "It doesn't matter. For a family like ours, a second marriage won't be worthless." I smiled and said, I have no value, stop dreaming. The Daniels family's company is returned to you. The things that belong to my mother, and you have been thinking about are now yours. I said, if you don't want the scandal of the Daniels family forcing their eldest daughter to death to spread, then let me go free. For the first time, hatred appeared in her clear and always gentle eyes. As if out of revenge, she lowered her voice and said softly, it's not your fault, Lily. Your husband would rather be with a dead person. You are indeed pitiful. After my love and hope for Elijah disappeared, these words could no longer hurt me. I told Logan, anyway, if Elijah comes to ask you, don't tell him where I went. Lily, you have everything. Elijah, I have nothing but a living shell. I heard from Logan that Elijah came back a few days after I left. He was alone, without Isabel by his side. Perhaps she did not survive, but died in Songshan Mountain and Arai Lake, which could be considered as the fulfillment of her last wish. Elijah called me many times, but I didn't answer. Then he sent me a message. What do you mean? Are you going to divorce me, Lily? I didn't reply. There is really no need to answer. Logan told me that Elijah was like an anxious trapped animal, looking for me everywhere, and even found the Daniels family. When he broke in, my father and aunt were discussing whether to capture me and marry me to the powerful widower who was over 50 years old. Lily, you don't know Elijah's expression at that time. TSK. Logan lamented to me on the phone. And didn't you call the police before? The police sent a receipt to your home and called you, saying they couldn't contact you. But the 2 suspects of attempted rape have been arrested. Logan also told me some follow-up news. Elijah went to the police station and asked about the details of what happened that day. Perhaps out of sympathy for me, the female police officer told him everything. Then Elijah broke down. After walking out of the police station, he knelt down on the side of the road and cried until he was hoarse. Logan was with him at the time, and when he saw Elijah raise his red eyes, he asked again, do you know where Lily went? I don't know. Logan looked at him and shrugged helplessly. You know, Lily's personality is like that, she's hard to warm up to. None of us are familiar with her, and she only recognizes you. These words seemed to completely break Elijah down. He began to investigate frantically what I had experienced over the years. What happened during those 3 years abroad? Every time something about what happened to me was revealed, Elijah fell a little more apart. I think he must regret what he said to me. But what has been done cannot be undone. Hearing about Elijah's pain, I didn't feel happy at all. Instead, I felt endless indifference in my heart. Besides, whether I was experiencing these things at the time or recalling them now, it is actually difficult for me to have any intense thoughts in my mind. Because all along, I have been living like a walking corpse, and only Elijah can mobilize my emotions and let me find a glimmer of hope in this stagnant life. Now they have all disappeared. That day, Logan told me that the high school we used to attend was holding a school anniversary ceremony and inviting outstanding alumni to return to attend. Both Elijah's and my invitation letters were sent to Elijah. He went back to visit his teacher, and the former head teacher was very emotional. You and Lily have been together for so many years and even got married. It's really rare. Not many young couples can get to this point. Elijah stood there woodenly, listening to the head teacher recounting the past, all the details that he had deliberately sealed away in the corner of his memory. He must have remembered how much he loved you when you were 17 or 18. Even when we were drunk together after the college entrance examination and walking on the street, he kept talking about marrying Lily in the future. Logan paused as he spoke. So when we were leaving school, I told him to stop pretending. Lily has been abroad for 3 years, and you never thought of visiting her once. You were only concerned with Isabel. Besides, she has given up on you now. 14. Elijah is a very smart man. From this sentence, he guessed that I was still in contact with Logan, so he found a way to find my contact address from him. That afternoon, when I came back from the hospital with a bag of medicine, I found Elijah standing at the door. The moment he saw me, his eyes turned red. Lily, you're sick too, aren't you? No, I'm healthy. I said indifferently. It's just some psychological and psychiatric drugs. I've been taking them for many years. It won't endanger my life for now. At least it's not as incurable as cancer. After saying that, I walked past him and was about to walk into the yard. But Elijah grabbed my clothes and begged, "Lily, I don't want to divorce you. I think it's ridiculous." Because my love for him didn't disappear in an instant, but was slowly worn away, bit by bit, as he chose Isabel again and again. Now that Isabel has passed away, he comes back to me. What does that mean? So I calmly suggested to him, "Actually, if you can't bear to leave Isabel, you can go with her. I don't miss her." After raising his voice suddenly, his voice dropped again. "I said it at the beginning, Isabel has cancer and is dying. I just feel guilty and want to accompany her to the end." I have lost count of how many times he has mentioned Isabel's illness in front of me. It seemed that because she had cancer, the whole world had to accommodate her unconditionally, and everything gave way to death. So I finally laughed and said, "What's so great about that? Isn't it just cancer? Isn't it just dying? Is she the only one going through this? Over the years I have cut my wrists, burned charcoal, and taken medicine several times, but I was saved every time. When she cried in front of you and said that she would not live long, I was actually envious of her. I envy her for being able to die without restraint. If I could, I would like to switch places with her. Let me die, and let her live well and be happy with you. Everyone will get what they want, and that's better." Elijah looked at me in disbelief. His eyes were like two bottomless lakes, and at this moment, they were filled with wet despair and pain. "Lily, I don't know. If I knew." Elijah didn't say the rest of the words, because he couldn't say it anymore. It was obviously him who made the mistake and hurt me, but he cried so miserably in front of me, as if I had done something wrong to him. Even at this time, I didn't have any big emotional fluctuations in my heart. "Elijah, people change all the time. People can change. So even if you said you would wait for me when you were 20, but changed your mind when you were 21, I never blamed you. I really loved you and I loved you for so many years. You were the only one who could affect my emotions. Even if you gave up on me at the beginning and ran to Isabel without hesitation, I could have let it go. It's just that this love has been worn away bit by your own hands. Whether it's you, Isabel, or that lunatic who likes Isabel, the reasons why you hurt me are the same. Because I have everything, I live a happy life while you are always caught in a dilemma, unable to get the love you want and have all kinds of shortcomings. But now, I've given up everything and have nothing left. Can you please let me go?" 15. Elijah finally disappeared from my life. Occasionally, I'd hear a few words about him from Logan. For example, the two suspects suddenly died in prison. For example, the Zhou family suddenly began to suppress the Daniels family's company without regard for the consequences, even if it meant using unreasonably high prices to cut off orders. In the end, the Daniels family went bankrupt and the Zhou family was also severely damaged. The pure gold shackles that had imprisoned me for more than 20 years finally collapsed and disappeared. After hearing the news, I was stunned for a rare moment, and then went to a nearby convenience store to buy some wine. Because I have had gastric lavage several times, my stomach has always been very fragile and cannot withstand the stimulation of alcohol. Occasionally when I go to a bar, I just order a glass of wine and leave it there without drinking it. But happy events are rare in life, so we should at least celebrate them. I took 2 small sips, felt a slight pain in my stomach, and put the can down. At this moment, the cell phone suddenly rang. Picked up it. It's Elijah. There was also a hint of drunkenness in his voice. "Lily, I'm venting your anger." For a moment, I seemed to be brought back to the time when I was 14 years old by this voice. I was bullied, so he went to pick a fight with someone. In the end, he came back to me with wounds all over his face and said, "I won the fight, Lily. I got my revenge for you." That was the beginning of my liking for him. But he quickly came to his senses. "Hang up," Elijah said anxiously and helplessly. "Don't. Lily, I just want to hear you say a few more words." I smiled and said, "Have you ever been to Tsongshan Mountain and Arai Lake to see Isabel again?" "Oh." Elijah didn't say anything, but the breathing on the other end of the phone suddenly became rapid, with a fear that penetrated deep into his bones. "I forgot to tell you actually, that night when you left me to find Isabel, she added me as her friend. So after that, I know exactly what you did at every stop of your trip. Elijah, I know you've done a lot for me, but I don't feel any gratitude towards you because of that. You don't deserve it." The night wind mixed with moonlight blew gently. After a long time, Elijah's voice finally sounded again, choked with difficulty. Yes, I don't deserve it. Lily, this is all my fault. I am the one who should be tortured. Please, just live well. I didn't say anything and just hung up. I went to the hospital for a follow-up checkup 2 days ago, and the doctor said my mood has improved a lot. Perhaps it is because I have escaped from all the heavy burdens that I have gained a little more courage to move forward. It's been a long time since I last dreamt about my teenage self and Elijah. I threw the beer can into the trash can and left the balcony. Go to bed early tonight. Let's go to the beach to watch the sunrise tomorrow. End of full text.